My cousin dropped her kids off at my house and demanded I babysit them while she goes on a 10-week vacation. When I threatened to report her to the police, she arranged to have them assaulted in my own homes, so she could take them back. Unlike real gold kids raised as golden children, never turn out to be as pure as their parents see them growing up. My cousin always got their way. No matter how nasty or irrational she acted towards Mesh, she got away with it all the time. And that's because she was the golden miracle child. What aided this most likely was also that my cousin was stunningly beautiful. She had thick wavy hair and green eyes, and my mom spent a lot of time comparing our looks. I have hazel eyes and curly hair, and I was never as spready as my cousin. My mom loved making comments, comparing use after Webb. Us became teenagers. She was constantly telling me to try and dress like my cousin and asking her to teach me makeup. But my cousin would also bully me and make fun of me. I ever asked her for help making myself prettier? That's how we grew up to be extremely resentful of each other. I think my cousin just latched onto the worst traits that we saw in my mother while I rejected them all. I think being put on a pedestal her whole life by my mom for simply being beautiful turned her into a rotten person who doesn't care about anyone but herself and thinks she can jet away with anything. Just because of her looks, the way my mom compared Deuce and put me down to me having a lot of self-esteem issues. And as an adult, I am very quiet and reserved. And some people describe me as a pusher. Recently, I have been going to therapy to try to grow a stronger spine, even though it has been hard trying to stand up for myself in my relations. Hips for the very first time. I feel like the way my family treated me really screwed me up as an adult, and it's hard for me to maintain any healthy friendships or romantic relationships. My cousin even slept with my boyfriend in high school and junior year, and for no real reason. She never liked him and told me many times she thought that was weird. My parents told me to let bygones be bygones when they found out what had happened. My cousin wasn't even given out to, and that was a moment where I truly realized just how much they preferred her over met the way that my dad just stood be. And watched my mom emotionally get under my skin for my entire life. Made me feel like no man would ever stand up for me or see worth in. It's very hard for me to trust and connect when dating, but my entire life hasn't been completely awful because of my mom and cousin, because the one upside of being the ugly sister growing up meant that I had zero social life and spent all my time studying. I ended up graduating high school with a 4.0 and landed myself a full ride at my number one choice for university, which was great because my mom told me the night before Ted High School that she was paying for my cousin's colleges since she was the eldest, but I would have to go to community and pay my way through it on my own. I remember sobbing and asking her why she didn't love me like she loved my cousin, and she insisted that she did, but my cousin deserved it more since she was her firstborn. The day I had landed my scholarship, I spent the entire day so excited to tell my parents about it. I guess part of me was kind of happy to have something that my cousin didn't. My cousin spent all her time in high school partying and earning poor grades, without any flack from my parents, and she was only going to college because my parents could pay for it. He wasn't even going to every good one because her grades are so crap. So I rushed home to tell my family that I had gotten a full ride to a prestigious university. I'd never been so excited to share good news with my family, but when I got home and told my parents about my scholarship, all my dad said was good job, and my mom didn't even look up from her phone or give me any response. Then she ignored me for the entire week after I had shared that news. It tried to ask her why. He was mad at me for getting a scholarship for college, but she literally just avoided making eye contact with me and walked into the other room. It was like she literally hated me for earning my scholarship when most parents would be excited. Whatever, that's when I started to understand just how alone I was and how isolated my family wanted me to feel. I didn't understand why either. Why had my mom even had me just to spend a lifetime hating me, and in turn making me hate myself. The day I got my scholarship turned into one of the worst days of my life as I cried myself to sleep and accepted that I would never have a family that loved me not like my cousin did. And I despised her for it. That night, I wrote in my journal until the sun rose about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was tired of being this sad little girl, and I decided I was going to transform every ounce of rage I had into academic success. Instead of throwing myself a pity party and begging my parents for love and attention, I was going to redirect all my focus and energy to my studies, as I always had, and give myself something they never could. I was going to be stable, independent, elegant, and educated event ho I might never beloved, so that's exactly what I did. I went to school and graduated with honors. I got a fantastic position in a company. I interned for right out of college, and I've been making six figures since. I earned 25 when I came home for the holidays. I would tell my family about how I was doing, and I would get random compliments from extended family members, but my own parents never went out of their way to acknowledge or congratulate me for my accomplishments as an adult. I knew better than to tell my mom about my high position at my company, or how much I was making, since I knew it would just make her resent me more. But told my dad in a year. He even told me that he was happy for me, and it was the nicest thing either my parents have ever told me. But even as an adult, my mom still treated me like an unwanted guest, and although I only saw them during the holidays, she would do everything in her power to get the attention off me. If anybody asked me a question or directed the conversation towards me. For example, we were having Christmas dinner one year when my uncle congratulated me on a promotion I had been telling him about earlier that day. It was my second promotion within the comp. Annie and I had gotten a significant raise as well. I had been telling him about how I was looking into purchasing my first house, My uncle mentioned the promotion and the potential house, and a few other extended family members congratulated me and were pretty unexpectedly kind about the news. Another one of my cousins asked me what area I was house shopping in, and that's when my mom cut me off, then said, "This is boring. Can we change the conversation?" Then under her breath, I heard her say it's probably not even true anyway. I ended up purchasing my house later that year and I posted about it in social media. Everybody in my family liked the post, except for my mom. I knew she was probably angry because my cousin was shaving a completely opposite life experience. Then Meshi had gone to college right out of high school, all paid for by my parents, and ended up failing out and getting pregnant by her first college boyfriend. I had a sneaking suspicion that my parents had asked her to get rid of the pregnancy. She ended up keeping it and tried making it work with her baby dad, that she had only known for 6 months. Well, it turns out that they were completely incompatible, but I guess it didn't stop them from trying to make things work or solve their relationship by having another kid. I remember having to hold back tears when I saw Ware posting about having a second child, since I knew the baby was probably being born into a toxic environment. Since my cousin was such an awful person, as was her baby dad, I had met him at the holidays, but had never even bothered to remember my name or make conversation with me. And every year he would bring home trays of food despite not bringing anything, obviously my cousin. And Israel, Asianship did not improve as we grew up, and we basically didn't talk to each other once we were both moved out of our parents' place. We'd each other on social media, and the few times where we would see each other during the holidays, my cousin would make nasty comments to me about my weight or the way I was dressing. I honestly think she was just projecting because I wear a lot of designer clothes, and I like cycling through my designer purses. And she would constantly ask me what fake purse I had brought this time one year, as soon as I walked in the door for Thanksgiving. She looked me up and down and said verbatim, "You see, you're dressed up again like the stuck-up which you are." It was so ridiculously rude and uncalled for, and she would even constantly insult me right in front of her kids, using curses and everything despite her kids being young. I don't feel bad saying that my cousin is pure trash, and that I didn't feel bad for anything. I did after she dumped her kids on my doorstep out of nowhere one day. I had just been relaxing in my house one weekend morning after a long work week when my doorbell rang, and I was completely shocked to see my cousin's 12 and 9-year-olds standing on my front porch, holding overnight bags. When I asked them what they were doing, Reethy said their mom was going on vacation for 10 weeks and that she said I was watching them. My cousin and I hadn't spoken since our family's Memorial Day barbecue, where she told me not to have more than one plate because she was sick of staring at my muffin top. I had no idea why she thought I would be her free babysitter for 2.5 months. My views were good, quiet kids who were obviously confused as well, so I let them inside while I started calling my cousin. My cousin ignored my first 10 calls, but I kept at it until she finally answered. As soon as she picked up, he said that there was no way that I was watching her kids and that if she wasn't their topic, of herself as soon as possible, then I will be calling CPS on her. I was literally Googling the number for Child Protective Services while I had her on speaker when she dropped a bombshell on me. Her voice got incredibly deep and scary, as she blackmailed me by saying that she would call my job and inform them that I was not taking my anxiety medication and get me fired, even though my cousin was an idiot who didn't understand anything about my job. My career was the most important thing to me, and I couldn't risk anyone threatening my position there. I just hung up afters. He said that and tried to figure out what to do next. It felt like my head was going to explode from the stress. Not only could I not watch her kids, but I had a trip planned 3 weeks from then and to go visit my long-distance boyfriend, Nathan, all the way in New Zealand. And me, this family, for the first time, we had been dating for a while. And I had been anticipating this trip all year. It was so important since he was introducing me to his mom and dad, and I wanted it to go perfectly. Now my life was thrown into chaos all because of my cousin, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea who else to call other than my mom, and it shouldn't have been surprised that she sided with my cousin, just like she had literally always done. It told my mom that my cousin hadn't even come to drop her own kids off, and she said that they were old enough to come to me house alone. Anyway, my mom started guilting me and saying that my cousin has done a lot for him, and that it needed to be there for her just this one time since it never was. That made me lose my mind, and I screamed at her at the top of my lungs and asked her to tell me one single time where my cousin has been there for him or improve. My life in any way. It told my mom that both her and my cousin had never been there for him and had treated me like I was some unwashed dog in their house instead of their own family. I demanded my mom visit me so that worst case scenario I could leave my mom in my house while it flew to New Zealand as my nephew's caretaker instead of me. I had very little hopes that my cousin would abandon her trip to come back for her kids, since she was so quick to dump them on me. When my mom finally got to my place, she was cold as ever and looked at me with the same hateful eyes that she always had when we sat down in my living room. And my mom explained to men that I was being an awful cousin to my cousin, as always, and lectured me about family being there in each other's times of need. I ignored all my mom's appreciative crap and demanded to know exactly what kind of vacation my cousin was on. That was so important that she would forget their kids and leave them with someone who essentially hated her despite being her own cousin. It told my mom that everything about this was weird and suspicious, and my cousin disappearing for 10 weeks out of nowhere and leaving 2 young kids behind made no sense, and that I wanted the truth. If I was going to be involved without consent like this, That's when my mom's face changed and eventually she admitted to that my cousin wasn't just going on some vacation, she was actually being flown out by her wealthy boyfriend. Ye laughed when she said this because it thought she was joking, but her face was dead serious. I was so emotionally exhausted at that point, and I freaked out on my mom asking her how she could be okay with this in any way. It told her that she had raised a complete loser of a daughter who left the country to go see a wealthy boyfriend instead of just getting a job to support their kids. My mom, of course, threw all my words back in my face and defended my cousin. She always had at ton point. She even said that it didn't matter how much money I had or how nice my house was, that I would alwa. Ye just bet the ugly duckling compared to my cousin born ugly, and I was going to die ugly after she said that I had to restrain myself from grabbing her by the shirt and throwing her out of my house. When I screamed at my mom to get the hello out of my house, she yelled back that she wasn't going anywhere. And when I tried directing her out of the room, she pushed me with all her strength into a coffee table that had one of my favorite vases. Sonnet, my boyfriend, had gifted it to me last time he had visited Yusa, and it was one of my favorite possessions. But after my mom pushed me into the coffee table, it fell on the floor and broke into a bunch of little pieces. Looking at the vase destroyed on the floor made me feel just as broken, and I think I had a full-on mental breakdown, and started screaming and crying at my mom to get out of my house, where I was calling the police on her. I feel so bad, because my nephews could definitely hear me from the other room, but I was a mess at that point. It had been such a long, painful day after. I finally managed to get my mom out of the house. My nephews spoke their heads out of the room and asked me if everything was all right. Their eyes were so wide and they looked so nervous and sad that it just broke my heart. Though I didn't know them very well at all. They were just kids with a mess of a mother, and I felt so bad for the men. That moment ordered takeout for all of use and let them watch movies and play video games in my living room until they passed out late. When I finally got through to her, I immediately started yelling at her for completely disrupting my life, and I brought up CPS again. My cousin just gave me this sinister laugh over the phone and told me again that it was my own choice, that I could either watch her kids or lose my chum points. She has said that she knew I was nothing without my job, and that I would go back to being a loser without it. This stung me right in the heart because it was. It's the honest truth. I had my degree and a solid resume, but I really identified with my career success, and I would do anything not to lose it at that point. I was crying and asking my cousin why she hated me so much, and why she had abandoned her little kids for a wealthy boyfriend. She just said that she was the type of woman who could make hundreds of thousands in 10 weeks, and that was something I never had to worry about. I think she was just trying to break me down and make me feel small at that point. So I just gave up, and honestly, it was working. We went back and forth for a while until my cousin literally hung up on me after a final threat of contacting my job, and I just broke down in tears again, realizing that I had no power against Thermy nephews. Were down watching a movie in the living room, and so I had privacy upstairs and decided to call my boyfriend. I hadn't had a chance to talk to him since my nephew had been left on my doorstep, and ended up breaking down and venting to him about all the details of the situation. I couldn't hold back tears as it told him about my cousin's threats and my mom's continued disrespect, and told him how I feel. LT completely trapped by my cousin event, though he's on the other side of the planet. My boyfriend made me feel so loved and supported, and was literally the only person who was in my corner, and I'm so grateful for him. He said that my cousin was potentially committing multiple crimes by abandoning her kids and threatening me with career blackmail, and that I needed to get some solid evidence of her actions. She suggested that I contact my cousin again and try together to repeat their threat about the false medical accusations, but this time secretly record the conversation. Honest evidence, my boyfriend knew about my past with my cousin and my mom, and pointed out that my cousin was clearly unhinged, and it wouldn't take a lot for my cousin to act on this threat, and that it should do everything to prepare. Of course, it freaked me out to heart, but he was 100% right. I knew my cousin was insane more than anybody, and I decided to go with his plan. Though I was still feeling very emotionally overwhelmed by everything that was happening, I still wanted my nephews to feel comfortable and cared for. I knew what it felt like to be each in a home where you weren't wanted, and I didn't ever want to make these innocent little boys who were related to me feel that way. I ended up going downstairs and playing a multiplayer video game with them for a little while, and it ended up being really fun. They were so surprised when I knew how to play first-person shooters, and were so cute as they were giggling and laughing while watching me get call after call. I wasn't expecting to bond with them after such a stressful weekend, but when we ordered pizza together and had a contest to see who could eat the most pieces of pepperoni, I realized that I honestly loved the two little boys. They were nothing like their mom. Though I knew my cousin couldn't have been a great parent, they were both super polite, and even though it took a little while for them to come out of their shells, they were both really sweet, funny little boys. They were very good about cleaning up after themselves, and were always saying please and thank you. As I was hanging out with my nephews into the afternoon, I realized that they both had holes in their socks, and my older nephew's clothes looked sort of small on him. A look through the rest of the clothes my cousin had packed for them, and realized that they were all either old or too small for the boys they were meant for again. I wasn't incredibly surprised that my cousin was a cheap, neglectful parent, and I decided to take my nephews to the mall for some new wardrobes. I almost cried multiple times during that trip to the mall because my nephews completely came out of their shells and were so excited and happy running around the mall. Like Azed, I remember what it felt like to be a neglected child, and I just wanted them to feel like they could have anything they wanted and that I was there for them and wanted to make them happy. So anytime we walked past a window and they wanted to go in a store, we would go in, and I kept buying them whatever they wanted. It was impossible not my youngest nephew was missing his two front teeth, and every time, he gave me his goofy little empty smile, my heart ached, and I had to buy him another little treat or toy. They left the mall that day with new clothes that looked great on them and fit them comfortably. And I had also bought them both Nintendo Switches. It was so hard not to spoil them. I didn't have kids of my own, and I had plenty of money to buy them the little things they wanted when I had bought them. The Switches, both of them, broke down crying and hugged me. And I noticed the 12-year-old had started crying again during our ride home, and I asked him if he was okay. He looked met through the tears in his eyes and asked me why I was being so honest to the man and why they deserved it. It told him that they deserved my kindness because they were my boys too, and that they were kids, and that alone meant they deserved to be happy. This only seemed to make him cry harder, and he told me that he was feeling angry at this mom for keeping us apart. This broke my heart, and it told him that I was sorry that we hadn't been able to get to know each other before. But I was really happy that he and his brother were here with men. Now, even if I hadn't expected it, I asked him some questions, and it's about how his home life was, and it was exactly as I expected. My older and younger nephew both slowly started to open up to me about how much their mom poorly treated them. My heart felt like it's tattered into a million pieces. As I heard this, I knew that my cousin and her baby dad were horrible people who were probably doing it, but it was another thing to hear it straight from their mouth and heart the pain in their voices when we got home. I cooked a big dinner for all of use, and they played on their Switches together for the rest of the night. I left them alone in the live. In-groom Togo called my cousin again in my room, ready to play out the plan my boyfriend had given me at this time. It tried my best to stay calm and collected on the phone, even though I wanted to call my cousin every name in the book. And it wasn't difficult to steer the conversation towards the medical accusation. As soon as I brought up CPS again, my cousin freaked out and threw the threat at my face, insisting I'd be fired for being crazy in secret, and saying that she didn't care if I was actually taking my medication or not. Nobody was going to know. If she was lying, she just kept telling me that nobody would believe a crazy, sick woman like me, and that I didn't deserve my job anyway. I honestly think my cousin might have been on drugs herself during this call because she sounded strung out and just kept repeating crazy phrases after I had gotten what I needed out of the call. I hung up on my cousin. She just kept saying that I didn't deserve anything in this life. I didn't deserve anything over and over again. Whatever, I pushed her words out of my mind. As I made sure that I had recorded the entire call successfully, I had my cousin recorded on audio say that she was going to make false medical accusations to my employer. I realized how genius my boyfriend had been to suggest getting this recording, and it started emotionally preparing myself for the fallout if my cousin followed through with her threat after getting the recording. It tried my best to calm down and put my nephews to bed the next morning before they woke up. I called CPS as soon as the line opened and reported the entire situation. I explained how my cousin had abandoned her children and how we were completely estranged. I even went as far as to say that she had not only abandoned them, but left them here under completely false pretenses and then used manipulation and coercion to force me to take care of them. I was surprised that CPS was actually pretty helpful, and I shared the recording with them. The agent that I spoke to took a moment to listen to the recording and said that it was clear that my cousin was using blackmail to neglect their children and was certainly committing a litany of crimes. The agent informed me that they would be opening an investigation immediately and that my cousin would be contacted as soon as possible. I was shaking after the call and tried to decompress the best that I could and spend the rest of the day with my nephews, relaxing and bonding with them. My mom ended up calling me the next day, and I really have no idea why I even picked up. I think I was just still so disoriented and emotionally vulnerable, and ended up getting into another huge fight with her over the phone. I let slip to her that I had gone and called CPS and that my cousin would finally pay for the way she treated me, and my mom hung up as soon as I said that I'll be honest, I was shaking after those calls. Just making the call to CPS was so nerve-wracking, and then fighting with my mom over the phone and telling her about CPS felt like a huge mistake. I didn't regret calling CPS, but I knew that my mom would do anything to protect my cousin and that she didn't care about my nephews. Safety just the same as my cousin. All I really knew about my mom was that she hated, that she loved my cousin, and I wasn't sure what would happen next. There was absolutely no way that my mom wasn't going to immediately contact my cousin after finding out that I'd contacted CPS and try to put her 2 steps ahead of me. I was sure that she had hung up the phone on me to call my cousin immediately, and there was no way that my cousin wouldn't know about me calling CPS by the next day. I had a sleepless night, and the next morning, when I arrived at work, my receptionist informed me that my supervisor had scheduled a meeting with me before lunch, which meant that it was urgent as nervous, as I was to learn about this impromptu meeting. I knew that it was coming, and like I said, I knew my cousin was crazy, and it was clear that all she wanted to do was ruin my life. I sat down in the meeting and cracked my knuckles to try to relieve the tension. I was feeling my 2 supervisors were there, and so was a higher up I had never met before. All of them were looking at me with suspicion in their eyes, and I felt like a bug under a microscope. Sure enough, they explained to me that they had been contacted by a trusted source within my family and had been informed that I was potentially unmedicated for a severe mental illness. They even told me that they had been given extreme details about past mental breaks that I have had, and they were concerned about me having a psychotic break within the office, but neither they nor my cousin knew how prepared I had been for this meeting today. Of course, I knew that my cousin was going to follow through with her threat she had always hated. Being able to rob me of my high-paying position would be the ultimate screw you to her ugly little cousin, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to do it, but she would revel in it if I hadn't been watching her nephews, even if I hadn't called CPS. Then I'm sure that she would have held it over my head and just kept blackmailing me, to doing whatever she wanted me to do for her. So in a way, I was happy to be dealing with this and getting my cousin's crap out of the way. It took out my briefcase and gave all of the supervisors a copy of my doctor's letter, as well as the attached documentation that proved that I had been diligently following my medication regimen. Here was proof going back almost 6 years that I had never missed a prescription pickup date and that my medication had been regular, as well as my moods. I had verification from not only my primary care physician, but my therapist and my psychiatrist as well. I gave my supervisors an informative but concise explanation into the issues within my family and my cousin's own mental health struggles, and informed them that the claims were completely unfounded and they could be sure of my stability based on all the medical paperwork I was providing for them. My supervisors took a while to look through all the paperwork, but as soon as they saw that I had medical evidence from multiple doctors, they seemed completely satisfied and even apologized to me for the inconvenience of calling me into this meeting and explained that they just had a responsibility to do their due diligence before they closed this matter. My one supervisor then took the opportunity of the meeting to congratulate me on the successful quarter. I had just that and bragged about my performance to the other supervisors, which made me look excellent. I literally left the meeting giggling because of how well it had gone despite the reason for it, and thought about how poorly my cousin's moronic plan had backfired on her. I could barely focus on my work for the rest of the day because I kept smiling dumbly every single time. I thought about how I got to call my cousin after I finished work and tell her about how their plan had been a complete bust. I called my cousin as soon as I got back to my cart that day and almost cried laughing, as I told her about how the meeting had only taken about 15 minutes because she had sounded so crazy and stupid on the phone and my bosses had never believed her. In the first place, my cousin was enraged and accused me of lying and said that she was sure I had been fired and that I was just trying to save face. This made me laugh harder, and it told her that she had failed at trying to get me fired, just like she had failed at everything else in her life. It told her that the only skills she had as a woman pushing 42 were lying and failing, and that even her own children were disappointed in my cousin lost I to love her again, and just kept calling me every name in the book. Oh, Veranda over again claiming that I had completely betrayed her, and said that she was shopping on the first plane back, and that she was going to make me regret every single thing I had done to her. I was still laughing after the call, but by the time I got home and reunited with my nephews, who were in a much better mood since they had gotten dropped off at me place, I realized that this whole situation was far from over and might get worse before it got better. All I knew for sure was that my cousin was completely out of her mind, and now she was flying home from another country to come. Egypt Revengian me realized that I was honestly terrified of what was going to happen next. My cousin basically had nothing to lose at this point, and she had always been unhinged and had started to fear for my safety. Then I started to think about my nephews. I wondered if I had made a mistake calling CPS. A huge part of me wished my cousin had lost their passport overseas and never came home. I had gotten so much closer to my nephews in the past couple days, and I realized that my heart was going to break when they had to leave. I didn't want to say goodbye to them. I didn't want to watch them walk back into my cousin's arms. She was perpetuating the same thing my mom had done. I realized I hated her more than anyone on this earth. I checked on my sleeping nephews, as I couldn't sleep since my mind was racing, and I cried quietly in the hallway after closing the door to the guest room. They were such innocent little boys, and they didn't deserve any of this. The next day was a complete disaster. I was awoken to the sound of somebody knocking on my door, although it sounded like somebody slapping as in bag over and over on my front door. When I opened it, there was my cousin next to a guy who had to be maybe 6'7" and weighed almost 320 pounds. She was gigantic, and one of his hands was the size of my entire head. I could barely see my mom standing right behind him, and before I could even open my mouth to tell them to get the hell off my property, the man put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me down with all his might, my cousin and my mom, and the stranger all made their way inside my house, and I was collapsed on my floor. A soreness sank into my shoulder where the man had thrown me down. I immediately started screaming at my cousin for bringing the stranger to my house and screaming at them not to touch me, but he seemed to speak only Ukrainian. I had no idea how this was even happening, and then I realized that my cousin had beaten CPS to my house. They had been scheduled to come around 11 a.m. that day, but my cousin had busted my door down at 8 a.m. My nephews had been woken up by all the commotion and were walking out of the guest room with sleepy eyes at that point. It tried to get in between the man, protect them from the stranger, but my cousin barked at the man to go put my nephews in the care. It was complete chaos. Once they realized what was happening, both my nephews started asking my cousin to leave them with me. I tried again to pull my oldest nephew out of the huge stranger's arms, but this time he grabbed my head and threw it into the wall. I saw stars as I sank to the floor and watched him carry my two little nephews out of my house. There was nothing I could do. My mom was crying too, but she left with them as well. Before they all walked out of my house, my cousin walked over to me. I held my head in my hands, and when I looked up at her, she spit at me square in the face. It was the most disgusting thing anyone's ever done. To me, in one of the worst days of my life, they all drove off in this giant black Escalade that I had never seen my cousin in before. I had no idea who the man was, and I couldn't believe the trauma that my cousin had just inflicted upon everyone. She hadn't even let them take any of their stuff. They had left without any of their clothes, neither of their switches, and no break fast. My heart broke for the man. I had an anxiety attack like I had never had before. I didn't realize how much it would hurt to care so much for my nephews, but I seriously loved those boys with all my heart, and I just wanted to protect them and make sure that they were cared for, like it ever had been when I was their age. But now they were scared and shoeless, and some ran on car with my psychotic cousin and a humongous stranger. I was so disgusted with my mom's behavior. I couldn't believe he had just stood by while she watched that huge man toss me around in my own home and pull my nephews out of their aunt's house without a word. I couldn't believe how evil my family had become, and I couldn't stop thinking about my nephews after I calmed down from my anxiety attack. I realized that it needed to snap into action, and that time was of the essence, and I was running out of it. When I finally came to my senses, I immediately called the police, and it turned out that they were already aware of the ongoing investigation because of Child Protective Services being involved and having an open case against my cause. Ina gave them all of the details of what had just transpired in my home only minutes before, and the officer on the line was actually incredibly helpful. My voice was shaking, but it tried to stay steady and focused as I described the stranger, and I racked my mind to try to remember the image of the license plate. Luckily, because of how much responsibility I have in my job, I was used to picking up on and remembering little details that other people ignored, and I somehow managed to remember every single number and letter on the Escalade's license plate. I gave the cops a description of the stranger, the full license plate, and a description of the outfits that my mom and cousin were wearing. I really do think my cousin was on some sort of uppers when she came to my house. That morning, she looked absolutely feral and had this wild look in her eyes. I think she had been doing substances since she had landed overseas. Wherever she was vacationing with her wealthy boyfriend, my cousin was crazy. But it was like something snapped in her end. I had never seen her act so truly unhinged and detached from reality after I gave the cops every single lead detail that I possibly could remember about my cousin and the cart they had driven away, and I hung up and did my best to take my mind off things, but I literally could not focus on anything else. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't nap, I couldn't watch anything on TV. I just kept seeing my little nephews' faces in my head every time I closed my eyes and could not think about anything else except making sure that they were okay. I thought more about my mom and why she had always made excuse after excuse for my cousin, and how it had enabled my cousin to grow up into becoming a truly evil person. I even found myself thinking about my cousin's trip, wondering what kind of stuff she had in there. If Shirley had a wealthy boyfriend and how much he had paid her, I wondered if the money she had made on her trip had truly been worth it. Even found myself thinking about what it would be like if it was just me and my nephews. I had the room for them, and now I definitely had the room for them in my heart as well. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted that outcome, my cousin out of the picture and just me and my nephews. I could give them everything that my cousin couldn't. And if my cousin and I ended up in front of a judge in a custody battle over my nephews, the judge would be staring at one woman with an overseas wealthy boyfriend and another with multiple degrees in a corner office. It tried to think positive things, but random dark anxieties about my nephew. Safety kept leaking into my mind. I wondered if the giant man she had brought into my house was her wealthy boyfriend. I wondered if he was with my nephews. I had just been laying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, overthinking, not realizing how much time had passed, when I finally got a call back from the police station. They had been searching for the Escalade my cousin had left in for hours, and finally found them. The officer who had called me back was the same one from earlier, and continued to be very helpful and shared a lot of details with me. He told me that they had 3 different police cars on the scene when they went to pull over the black SUVs, since they knew the man had already been violent that morning. Sure enough, even with firearms drawn on him, the man ran forward and tried to attack an officer, and ended up getting hit in the thigh. He had punched 2 officers in the head, and given a female officer a black eye, my cousin had also physically attacked the officer who had tried to put handcuffs on her. Initially, it tried to picture it my insane cousin and the giant stranger physically battling a group of cops on the shoulder of the highway. I could not believe that something like this was actually happening in my family, and I wasn't just watching it on reality TV or something. I was still reeling in shock from everything the officer had shared with me about my cousin's arrest when he began telling Meth that my cousin actually wanted to speak to me. I couldn't believe my ears, and he confirmed that my cousin was sure that she wanted to use her one call on me. I asked the officer if he thought she was going to ask me for bail money, and he was shocked and said yes, that's what she was screaming about. It told the officer that I wasn't even going to take her call and that she could route in the referral. I cared. The officer ended up giving me an understanding laughing. He finally finished up the call without speaking to my cousin. It was a complete mess event. Though my cousin was finally behind bars where she belonged, I found out my neph. Edos were in CPS protection, and although they were safe, I was so worried. I also only had a week until my New Zealand trip, and if I didn't go, I would be losing thousands and thousands of dollars in bookings. So also, as I had mentioned earlier, if I canceled this trip, it would have looked extremely disrespectful to my boyfriend's family before I even got a chance to meet them. I had planned on marrying my boyfriend one day, and the last thing I wanted to do was give his family a bad first impression of me. I was going to be in their life forever. I called CPS to check on my nephews and Jay. I asked if I could speak with them, but they didn't let me. They tried to explain to them that I was family and some of the only mentally stable family they had, but they didn't care. I was dealing with a different department than I had contacted before, and they were relentless at that point. I was completely emotionally exhausted, and I had officially run out of options. I spent the rest of the week trying my best to prepare for my trip while continuing to burst out in random tears. I remembered my nephews and thought about where they might be. I felt so bad because my boyfriend, Dan, I had been so excited for this trip for so long, and now it was finally here, and I was completely distracted and full of anxiety. All of our conversations during the week leading up to my flight ended up being about how nervous and tense I was feeling, even though my boyfriend was incredibly kind and supportive. As always, I was so angry at my cousin for how she had treated her nephews. I couldn't believe how disrupted my life had become because of my cousin's one choice to go visit hers stupid wealthy boyfriend. I was so thankful that my job had been understandai, ninjing, but just thinking about how my cousin had been so quick to try and get me fired made me feel so betrayed and distrustful of anybody in my family. Even my dad was off somewhere and not getting involved in all this drama when he surely was aware of all of it. Who was spineless, just like my useless mommy. Mom didn't even care about her grandchildren. She had enabled my cousin's idiot choices, and that had led to her grandchildren being in the custody of strangers. I was sitting at the bar at the airport on the day of my flight to New Zealand, 2 cocktails deep when I started looking and got some photos of my nephews that I had taken while they were staying with me. We had taken these silly photo booth pictures at the mall all together, and I couldn't help but begin crying all over again over how much I loved and missed them. I decided that that would be the last time I cried until I landed back in America and told myself that I really needed to try my best to enjoy the time with my boyfriend and his family. I had a life as well, and I couldn't let my cousin ruin my time even from all the way across the globe. My time in New Zealand ended up going amazingly. I hadn't seen my boyfriend in months, and when her aunt told me in the airport and picked me up princess style, I felt my heart explode from happiness. I had been through so much in those past couple of weeks, and just being back in the arms of my boyfriend, who was so romantic caring to me, made me feel so healed, and he spent every moment of the trip catering to me, meeting his family excellently, and I got along with both of his parents as soon as I was introduced. They turned out to be really fun, active people, and we did a lot of sightseeing together where they took me to their favorite nature hikes and views in their area. At one point, my boyfriend took me on a hike, just the two of us, to his favorite secret waterfall, and we skinny dipped together and just swam and laughed and kissed for hours. It was one of the most romantic days of my life, and I could not believe how perfectly the trip had gone, even though I was so worried before I left. But of course, when I got home, the nightmare with my cousin resumed. I decided to head to the local police station a couple days after I landed back in the U.S. to Fisher. I pressed charges against not only my cousin, but my mom for breaking and entering into my home. They had that man literally pick me up and to smet at the sides so that they could barge into my house, and I was not letting that slide when I went to go file the charges. I learned that the CPS investigation into my cousin was ongoing, and I was kind of frustrated to heart that they hadn't found anything conclusive yet. If they just spoke to my nephews, they would have understood what they had been through. On top of that, my cousin had literally been arrested with a guy who had attacked multiple cops, and so I didn't see how that wasn't proof that she was clearly an unfit parent for my nephews. I left the police station that day content that the charges were filed against my family, but incredibly frustrated to learn that the CPS investigation wasn't resolved yet. I just kept worrying about my nephews' safety and knew that them being with strangers couldn't have been good for them, even if it was better than being with my cousin. I also could not stop thinking about how my cousin had dragged them out of my house that morning without letting them grab any or things. My youngest nephew had this little dinosaur plus hide that he brought literally everywhere. I had been sleeping with it ever since my cousin had taken my nephews away that day, and some mornings it made me want to cry just to wake up and see that little plush dinosaur looking back at me like I said my cousin hadn't even let them put their shoes on. The poor little boys were so disoriented and felt so lost and abandoned, and I just wanted to make things right for them. But I felt like I had no power until CPS finally made a decision about a month after my cousin's arrest. After calling CPS every single day and demanding updates on her case, they had finally come to a conclusion. They had made a decision to officially remove both my nephews from my cousin's custody and put them in protective care. When the CPS agent first explained this to him, I was annoyed. I asked him to explain how that was any different than what had been going on. And they said that it now meant that my cousin was not only being taken to court, but she would have to go to court if she wanted custody back of her kids ever again. I asked the CPS agent if it was likely she would win if she tried to get custody back, and the CPS agent told me that it depends if any other more fitting relatives would show up to court and ask for custody of my nephews. I knew immediately that that was what I was going to do, and I opened a separate court case in an effort to try to win custody of my nephews. I didn't care how long it took. I didn't care how expensive the legal fees would be, and I opted to get the best lawyer that I could afford to work on my custody cases, since I knew it was one of the most difficult legal battles you could enter into. But before the custody case even started, the case I had against my cousin for the breaking and entering into my home was the first one to begin. I know some people might judge me for taking my own cousin to court, but I literally would have fist fought there in a parking lot at that point. But I figured I should follow the law if I ever wanted custody of my nephews. At the end of the day, that was my only goal in all of this. I just wanted my cousin out of the way and my nephews back at home with me. On the first day of our trial, I saw my cousin in court, and it was the first time we had seen each other since the day she had broken into my house and let the man attack me. At the very last interaction her and I had was me looking up at there and her spitting a huge globe of spit directly into my faces. So it was fair to say that neither of us were excited to see the other. Well, the trial began, and eventually the judge mentioned that I had opened a custody case against her for full custody of my nephews. I guess my cousin's public defender hadn't informed her before then, and she was finding out for the first time in the courtroom that day. Well, my cousin has never been one to react well to bad news. And after the judge let the news slip about my custody charges against my cousin completely snapped despite us being in the middle of a courtroom, my cousin slowly angled her body towards me, screamed my name, and then pounced on me like some sort of crazed hyena. She was clawing and scratching at my face and trying to rip out chunks of my hair. It didn't take long for the bailiff to come over and pull her off of me, but she managed to bite down extremely hard on my forearm right before he got at her. It was one of the worst pains I had ever felt in my life, and the bite looked nasty and ended up getting infected. All this happened right in front of the judge, and once everything had calmed down, I knew my cousin had just sealed here an entire fate. It took months and months, almost 2 years, actually, for all of the criminal charges against my cousin to pass and for her to finally get locked up for good. She was serving a life sentence thanks to all of her crimes stacked up on top of each other, and there was no way she was seeing the light of day. And yeetim soon, since her chances for appeal were so poor, it never dropped the breaking and entering charges against my mom. And the only way my mom managed to stay out of prison was by testifying against my cousin in court and throwing her under the bus. I don't think I've ever felt such sweet satisfaction as watching my mom blame my cousin for everything that had happened while sobbing her usual crocodile tears. I could not believe that my mom was finally betraying her perfect golden child, event though it had taken a lifetime, as well as the government's help. I knew that day, looking up at my mom on the stand, that it was the last time I was ever going to see her. It was the last time I ever wanted to see her. I had seen enough of her and my cousin for a lifetime, and I was done with their constant toxicity. My cousin had completely transformed my life into a never-ending legal battle, and I just wanted to have a normal day-to-day life. Again, the custody battle for my nephews dragged on. Their birth father and his family began fighting me in court for full custody of the man. It just dragged the case out further. I didn't care. There wasn't a force on earth that could keep me from my nephews. Now that my cousin was locked up, it took almost 2 years of legal battles, but eventually I won full custody over my boys and brought my nephews back home. I will never forget how big they smiled and how tight they hugged me when they came home and found the bedrooms I had decorated for them in my house. I walked into my youngest nephew's bedroom and her and Tom to show me his rediscovered Switch. It surprised him with his little plush dinosaur and caught him in a tight hug when he fell into my arms. The next thing I knew, my nephew joined you. Both boys cried into my hair and told me how much they missed me. My eldest boy looked up at me, smiled with his big eyes full of tears, and just said, "I knew it, Auntie. I just knew you would come back for us."